what I want to go over with you is a little bit of behind the scenes. If you're putting together an herbal clinic and you're working in a disaster relief, or you're working in an underserved area, places so you know where to start when you're putting together your teams and trying to plan for the equipment and materials that you need in order for it to be a successful thing and for everyone to be well cared for and for there to be a minimal amount of stress. So one of the first things you will want to think about is the number of team members. This is very, very important. In the previous picture that you saw of our team that the other organization planned for, they planned for roughly half of what ended up being on that trip. They added on people at the last minute, brought in a couple of extra translators, brought their own kids, and they were not prepared for the number that we had, which when all was said and done was probably in the neighborhood of 35, 36 people. And that number kind of fluctuated a little bit. So knowing the number of team members that you have is very important, and a lot about those team members you'll have to know in order to be able to adequately provide the materials for them. And by that, I mean provisions. By that, I mean having adequate food, water, and medical care. On top of that, students, at least at our school, are responsible for their own camping gear and whatnot, but we usually provide the food and the provisions as part of the provider role. And when we are doing this, it's very important we get an accurate picture of what each one of those team members is like. And I start this process usually 3 to 4 months before we do an herbal exposure week. And I collect information onto a giant spreadsheet, and I go through it, and we just try to make sure that we are doing it in the smartest way possible to eliminate a lot of the mistakes that we've experienced. Every mistake that could be made, I think we've done that. So the first way that I do that is I assign a manager or provisions team leader, and that person is solely focused on all of the things that we will talk about in this very quick lecture. And I do want to point out that this is just the most superficial level of what this involves. There's a tremendous amount that goes into it, but it's absolutely well worth it. And if you think that you will ever be doing medical outreach in other communities, disaster relief, if you're going to work in those underserved communities, it is incredibly important. I cannot stress enough how much these things are important to consider before you go out with your team. Having that team leader to handle the provisions, they are the person who is in charge of the giant spreadsheet. They are the person who's getting the information from your team members. They can also delegate as well. And that's something I get into in considerably more detail in our own classes. But that person in charge is someone who is going to be able to oversee the sizable task of getting all this information and putting it together. They also will find out what resources are available on site. And I'm going to give you just one of many examples. There are many. So if you're going, let's just say you're going into a very remote or an austere environment where your team is going to be camping. The very first thing that I recommend finding out is water. You're going to ask yourself when you go there, or a scout goes there in advance to check out the area, what is the water there? Is it potable? Can it be drank? Is it safe for drinking? If so, is there enough? What is the source that it's coming from? Is there, how close is it to where you're going to be? If it is not safe for drinking, where is the closest source of drinking water? How far away is it? Do you have the equipment that you can use to bring in water? How much water do you think you're going to need? And that includes for cooking, that includes for drinking, that includes for washing dishes, for showering, for washing hands, hygiene, all different types of things. There's a considerable amount, just even on that one little thing that you will need to be thinking about in terms of resources. So looking at what is available to you in the community where you're going to be working and the facilities that you may or may not have. You're going to be camping. Is it in a community center? What are the resources that you have, and how can you use those to make sure that you're making the smartest packing list possible? And of course, a budget to work with, very important. Once you identify these things here, then you need to have a budget so that you can figure out exactly how you're going to make the smartest decisions and where you're going to source things from. Are those things already there, or do you need to bring them in? How are you going to divide that up? Who's in charge of all those things? Now, again, these are just 4 things out of many, 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 many things. Every one of these sections can be divided, and there's a lot more than what's here, but this is a really good place to start. Okay, now you can see, here's one of our herbal clinic teams. This is from Navajo Nation 2019. That was the fall right before the pandemic. And we had, this is one of the best teams I think that we've ever had, a very, very close-knit, tight group. Everyone was really just very, very bonded. There were some fantastic relationships that happened from this. And the way that we ran this one, the way that I have run all of our herbal clinic outreach for probably, I don't know, 7 or 8 years, at least, probably more, actually, probably closer to 10 years, is that we have a provider team that we rotate. Everyone has the opportunity to learn that, and they handle the duties for a specific length of time where they are the provider for that day for the rest of the clinical team. What you want to be able to have happen is your clinicians, when they're putting in that 10 to 12 hours a day, working in communities, they need to be able to focus on that. They need to be able to do as many intakes and work with, if they are doing the clinic or they're working in the apothecary, they need to be able to focus on that. And that is why we have a provider team that comes in and handles not only, and when I say provider, remember I'm talking about the food, the water, and the medical care of the team. Okay, so what that means is the providers on any given day, they're not pictured in this particular photo, but they have just created the food for this team, and they have spent the day making sure that the food is healthy, that it's fresh, that it is something that will make sure all of the needs of the team are met. I'll talk about that more in the next couple of slides. And they're also keeping an eye on, that's a piece that I felt like was incredibly important, keeping an eye on the team themselves to make sure everyone is functioning okay. So if you have someone on the team who's getting sick, your provider is the first person, hopefully, to be keeping an eye, because they are also the medic. They will be the one who can see that they will know very closely the details about who's a diabetic, who has issues with low blood sugar, who has issues with fatigue, chronic fatigue, or what have you, who has allergies and to what. And they are the ones who are able to help when they see someone who is kind of starting to look a little bit listless or fatigued, and they're the ones who can provide good nutrition. And they can also provide a lot of support where it's needed, or they can alert an herbal clinician to step in and say, hey, Bob, you look like you're having a bit of, you look like you're a little bit tired. I want you to take a break. Beth over here has made some food for you. So take 15 minutes and have a break. And also here's a formula for you. I want to make sure that you're feeling able to finish all of these intakes. So now that is one of the most it's the most underrated role on a clinical team. And I have never seen a clinical team other than our own pay this attention to it. And it's just a shame, because you really need to have this in order for that team to be able to function at 100% optimal with their efficiency and to the best of their knowledge. So the provider is a person who can make that happen. And being able to predict or preempt any issues, you have to have a provider on your team. We will never have a clinical team without one. And usually it's a team of providers for the day, and they all rotate. Now, earlier I was talking to you about how many are on your team and what age are they. This is very important. You might be wondering, why does it matter what age? It matters very much. The difference between someone who is, an adult in his 30s, consuming what does he need in order to feel nourished, will be very different from the nutritional needs of a teenage boy who's 15. Or someone who is 65 and dealing with a lot of health issues and doesn't eat very much, but doesn't feel really good when they do eat. So this is really important, along with their health history, to make sure that you're very aware of that.